Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Declining fertility rates are not a news anymore. Women are having fewer children than their ancestors. Child free by choice, double income, no kids are becoming a norm. I have said that this is different than antinatalism. The people who are having fewer or no children are not doing that because of philosophical arguments for antinatalism or any kind of moral judgments about procreation. I thought this was the case based on so many surveys that measure people's desires to have children and the reality of how many children they actually end up having. But I was wrong, or I might have been wrong. It's time to take the antinatalist variable seriously. New Perspectives from Procreation Ethics and Moral Judgments by Diogo Bourbon was a paper published recently in the Journal of Biodemography and Social Biology. In this paper, Diago argues for the case that maybe a significant portion of the people who don't have children or who don't want to have children are actually motivated by antinatalism. For decades, governments and researchers have explained falling birth rates using factors such as economic insecurity, high cost of raising children, housing problems, career concerns, lack of work life balance, or relationship instability, and so on. Diago agrees that these factors matter. But he argues that there is another factor that is largely missing from demographic research. Some people decide not to reproduce because they believe reproduction is morally wrong, irresponsible, or unjustified. He calls this missing factor the antinatalist variable. Morally grounded evaluations of procreation constitute a distinct motivational parameter, what is here called the antinatalist variable, that ought to be incorporated into empirical fertility research alongside conventional economic and life course predictors. The paper provides evidence from a number of surveys around the world to point to the possibility that moral evaluation about procreation might at least be a contributing factor among others. I created a table of the surveys and studies mentioned in the paper, their scope or country where they were conducted, and the important findings to suggest that people's procreative decisions may have something beyond just material needs or aspirations. For example, in a survey in South Korea in 2024, almost 20% of the childless correspondents mentioned unsafe or unhappy future for children. Similarly, in Pew Research in the United States, 38% of those who did not want to have children worried about the state of the world they would bring a child into, and 26% cited climate change as the reason. GlobeScan was a survey in many different countries, including India, South Korea, Egypt, Turkey, Hong Kong, Thailand, and so on. And it involved more than 29,000 participants. 40% said climate change discourages them from having children. Extinction too was not like a taboo subject. In a series of studies as part of experimental moral psychology, people did not find extinction to be all that bad. When asked in the most straightforward and unqualified way, participants did not find extinction uniquely bad. Not just that they don't think it is bad, but there are people who believe that extinction would occur. A survey research on public perceptions of future threats to humanity documents that over a half of respondents rated the risk of our current way of living ending within a century at 50% or more. A quarter rated the risk of humanity becoming extinct with a century at the same level. The point is not whether these beliefs are grounded in facts or not, but that the pessimistic outlook towards the future affects their procreative decisions and can be one of the reasons to not have children for the sake of those children. With this evidence, the paper suggests that future surveys should account for people's moral judgments about their procreative decisions. But the problem is how to measure them. For one, people are not going to respond to questions like whether you agree with David Bennett's axiological asymmetry or Mati Häyry's risk argument. I don't think public perceptions are driven by such articulate arguments, even though they might in fact be agreeing with them. That's why there is a need to devise innovative scales, questionnaires, and way to probe the minds about how procreative decisions are being viewed and made. For that, we ought to know different types of antinatalisms. The paper classifies antinatalism primarily into three categories. One is environmental antinatalism, which is that you abstain from having children for climate change related issues. This could involve both philanthropic and misanthropic aspects, like you don't want to create another set of feet to the already enormous carbon footprints, or you don't want to bring a child here who will face the possibility of suffering from climate change. This is part of a larger but local conditional antinatalism, which is based on some conditions of the world in a certain time or certain geography. For example, many people worry that the current political situation is not suitable to bring another child here, but if the situation improves, then they may not have as much of a problem. And there is global unconditional antinatalism, which is the flavor we talk about on this channel most of the time. This is about the human or sentient condition which inherently has attributes within it such that procreation can never be morally permissible. Now, if all of these different kinds of anti-procreation attitudes are measured by some mechanism, the paper argues that will give policymakers a greater clarity in designing public policies rather than just doling out money or medals for having more children. It recognizes that for global unconditional antinatalists, nothing is going to move the needle. But for other conditional antinatalists, it may help change their mind if the situation is changed. From our perspective, we would also come to know how deep we stand in the water and how wrong I am to claim that declining fertility rates have reasons other than antinatalism. On similar lines, there was a dissertation presented at a university in San Diego talking about the lived experiences of child-free women. A Changing America, a Changing Choice, the lived experience of child-free women on the millennial Generation Z cusp, by Tatum Christine Brown. That millennial Generation Z cusp, by the way, is also called Zillennial generation. And as the title suggests, this dissertation talks about lived experiences of child-free women in this age group in America. This is more than 100 pages long, and I could only get first 24 pages from the internet. But looking at the table of contents, it does seem to talk about antinatalism at length. This includes population growth and emergence of antinatalism, the psychological foundations of antinatalism, global antinatalist movements like 4B in South Korea, environmental activism, intersectional antinatalist movements, online antinatalist communities, socio-cultural influences of antinatalism, gender roles and expectations of motherhood, the cost of motherhood, and so on. I don't have access to the actual survey or interview results that were done as part of this research, but I would guess that given this much of a background of antinatalism, it does appear, that is, antinatalism does appear in these women's thinking. In January this year, we covered a paper by Häyry, Out There, No One Has a Right to Die. In the paper, Häyry argued against space exploration, specifically when it contains multiple generations. The distances to travel are vast, which means we will have to have journeys which span over many generations. New people will be born in spaceships and live their entire lives in them, and the mission of their life is predetermined to serve the project that their ancestors had started. Häyry also imagined scenarios where such space-traveling populations could be governed by totalitarian regimes and they would have no escape, no exit. Such projects, if started today, could have irreversible consequences, and there are so many things that can go wrong. And so he suggests application of precautionary principle, which advises us to engage in these activities only when it has been established that the risk is sufficiently low to be managed by feasibly executable control arrangements and mechanisms. In other words, in the situation of uncertainty, err on the side of caution. Häyry had concluded that space exploration in the sense of colonizing other worlds is an irrational and immoral endeavor. The sooner the ideas of traveling into stars are abandoned, the better. Now, this was in January, so this is not a news. A new paper responding to this was published. In Space, No One Can Hear the Screams of Paternalism, a response to Häyry's Immorality of Space Exploration by Stephen J. Firth. The paper does not dismiss Häyry's concerns. It argues that they should be taken seriously, but the answer is not prohibition. Rather, it is regulation and governance. Firth says that applying precautionary principle to space exploration is mistaken. This is because there are some preconditions that have to be met before applying the precautionary principle to a situation, and those are not met in this case. The primary precondition is that inaction as a precaution exploration has to have no negative consequences. The problem arises because the precautionary force of his argument depends on a background assumption that abstention avoids serious harm. But this, according to Firth, is not true. We are in continuous need of energy and resources. If that need is not met, then we risk causing a greater amount of harm here on Earth. Pressures associated with population density, resource scarcity, energy demand, and health are the problems that need to be solved by other means. And so, mere abstention from space exploration won't solve this problem. As for concerns like second generation totalitarianism, this was Mati's term originally, these risks exist here on Earth too. In quite literal sense, we are on a spherical spaceship on a multi-generational travel going around the sun and a black hole, and there is no exit from the totalitarian regimes here. So according to Firth, unless you are also an antinatalist for Earth-dwelling beings here, you can't selectively prohibit space travel. Hardship and constrained exit have characterized many lives on Earth without rendering procreation itself impermissible. So it seems odd here to claim the moral wrongness of creating lives which may or may not contain suffering. And we know that Mati Häyry is an antinatalist philosopher. So I really struggle to find any inconsistency in his suggestion against space exploration involving multi-generational travel. Firth recognizes this, saying, I suspect for many readers that his conclusion here only follows were they to share Häyry's antinatalist commitment to a stronger antinatalist thesis. But he makes a mistake in glossing over nuanced differences between procreation here on Earth and procreation during space travel when he says that second generation argument more targets the notion that bearing children is morally wrong rather than the claim that space births are uniquely suspect or that human settlement in space will fall under totalitarian regime. This is not actually true, and Mati Häyry in his original paper differentiates between the situations that we face here on Earth and the ones in space exploration. It may be one thing to commit your offspring to a world we know and to an extent control, yet another to condemn them to the eternal darkness of the outer space, to put the matter poetically. And so we come back to the difference of increased uncertainty. Space is a place which we do not know enough and have very little control on. Therefore, Mati applies the precautionary principle over there. Stephen Firth's criticism of inaction as an alternative to space exploration is an assumption only on the basis that Mati does not provide any other solutions to harness resources here on Earth. That's not an invalid assumption. However, that topic probably was out of scope of Mati's original paper, talking about the risks of space exploration. There was a doctoral thesis submitted by Harish Narayanan at Southampton University, Dicing with Life, an antinatalist argument for the immorality of procreation. It is a long thesis of more than 240 pages, so I have not been able to read it all. But just going by the abstract, what Harish is doing here is examining the existing arguments for antinatalism, especially the ones by David Benatar, and identifies some major problems with them. Then he proposes his own argument for antinatalist conclusions. This argument is based on a combination of three claims. This argument states that almost all cases of procreation are immoral because they involve the imposition of significant risk on the individual brought into existence. That is the risk claim. In the absence of the two best justifications for risk imposition on others, namely the absence of consent from the created being to being exposed to such risks, that is the non-consent claim, and the absence of any adequately compelling moral or practical reason to impose the risk, that is the non-necessity claim. The rest of the thesis is defending objections to his arguments, both actual objections as well as anticipated objections. One point to note here is that you might think that the risk argument has already been presented by Mati Häyry, but here Harish is combining the risk argument with two other claims, the non-consent claim and no necessity claim, and so the combination is an innovative argument according to this thesis. suffering plays an important part in many arguments for antinatalism. There is an online course organized by the Center for Reducing Suffering about suffering focused ethics. The course is free. It starts on July 13th, running for 6 weeks until 24th August. The format is a weekly 90-minute discussion on the topic and would expect about 2 to 3 hours of reading through the week. The curriculum is quite crisp. It starts with the core ideas of suffering focused ethics and why we should prioritize reduction of suffering, followed by whether happiness can outweigh or compensate for the suffering that exists in the world. In the third week, you would go through objections to suffering focused ethics. Fourth week brings you to different paths, traditions, and moral views which can support suffering focused ethics. Week 5 will be implementation of these ideas, how to reduce suffering effectively on large scales. Finally, the last week talks about your own career and research paths in this field and practical takeaways. There is no formal education needed, and there is an application form which I will link in the description, which needs to be submitted before June 14th. Now, some fun news. Lawrence had an antinatalism meetup in a park in London. Here you can see them enjoying the sun, which is pretty opposite of a pessimistic, depressed death cult. Who said antinatalists can't enjoy pleasures of life? I think this photo is the antinatalist equivalent of vegans who didn't die of protein deficiency. Anyway, good one, Lawrence, and hope you have more meetups. And if you also have any antinatalist meetups anywhere, please let me know. The more, the merrier. Speaking of good news about antinatalists, Amanda Sukenick has graduated from the University of Chicago in Masters of Arts program in the Humanities, earning an MA in philosophy. So a huge congratulations to Amanda on becoming a proper antinatalist philosopher. I say this because I know that her work, even for this degree, has been around antinatalism. She references this in her latest interview on The Dissenter with Ricardo Lopes. In the podcast, they talk about Amanda's journey to antinatalism, different arguments for antinatalism, and their weightages in respect to their effectiveness, the distinction between the instinct to have sex versus the desire to have children. This is one of the favorite questions of Ricardo, I think, because he asks this to almost all antinatalist guests. Eugenics was discussed twice, one in the light of pronatalism and another as a misinterpretation of contemporary antinatalism, as well as eugenic historical roots of antinatalism. They spend a good amount of time on the right to die as an idea and as a movement, which also includes Amanda's views on death. Extinction and transhumanism was also discussed, and the juicy part of Amanda's debate with Rachel Wilson, which was really the case of a pigeon shitting on your chessboard to declare victory. And Ricardo even proposes some flaws in Wilson's style as well as substance of arguments. As always, a long interview, but an enjoyable one.